All right, I'm going to go ahead and end that poll and share the results. All right, it looks as though we have 47% from Title I, 7% from Title IV, 32% from other WEOR partners and stakeholders, 13% from state and local workforce innovation, and then we have a pretty decently even spread of locations. Southern Illinois seems to be 60% of the people who are here. That's wonderful. All right. So without further ado, I will hand it off to Nathaniel Carlson to start the presentation.
All right, good morning, everybody. I regret that I'm having technical difficulties and I'm going to be unable to share my smiling face with you all today. I even got all dressed up for this, which those of you who know me means I'm wearing a collar. But happy to be here nonetheless, and happy to do a kind of virtual version of the apprenticeship boot camp that we offered in person back in August. We've had a lot of people join the Apprenticeship Illinois team through our grantee partners and intermediaries and workforce boards and all the great integrated business service team work that's being done since then. And so we're happy to provide either a refresher for those of you who are there, or if this is your first time, happy to give a pretty sizable in-depth overview of what it means to be in the role of apprenticeship navigating, both in the outreach process and through registration. So my name is Nate Carlson. I'm the state apprenticeship mentor for Apprenticeship Illinois through NIU. And if this is your first time meeting me, if you're not on our monthly grantee calls, then I would invite you to drop by my weekly office hours, Tuesday and Thursday from 10 to 2. I am available for any questions you have related to apprenticeship registration, meeting with employers, just sitting in on your calls with employers to offer feedback or chime in when necessary. I'm really here as a resource to you. Any way I can help you develop apprenticeships in your area, that's what I'm here to do. So Tuesdays and Thursdays from 10 to 2 specifically, I'm on call and available for you to pop into my Zoom, but I'm also available by appointment beyond that. But just know that anytime you have any questions about apprenticeship stuff that's not grant related, but is more programmatic in nature or dealing with apprenticeships themselves, feel free to shoot those questions and inquiries my way. And as always, if you're having questions on the grant side of things, feel free to send questions at the Chase Department. So we are here to talk about navigating apprenticeship. Today's agenda, we're going to talk about what is registered apprenticeship. We're going to do a brief 101, make sure we're all on the same page. And there's a double purpose to that, because not only is it going to get us all on the same page, but we're going to go through the 7 DOL components of registered apprenticeship, which are really important in that not only are they what I would present to you when getting all of us on the same page, but they're the same talking points that I would present to employers in a role as a navigator. And so hearing them here today will better prepare you for sharing them with employers. We're going to talk best practices for apprenticeship outreach in terms of the collaborating with members of our integrated business services team, making sure we're not reinventing the wheel. We're going to talk about the big 3 C's of registering an apprenticeship. And if you happen to know those already, feel free to drop them in the chat, just as a little bonus trivia. And then we're going to talk about navigating standards builder for actually registering a program. And we'll have time as well for Q&A. So we've got a lot of content to cover in the 90 minutes we have, and I want to make sure that we have time for Q&A. As we go, if I'm moving too fast or you need clarification about a concept, as we said, feel free to drop that question in the chat, and I'll try to get to those as they come. It's not interrupting the flow of the presentation too much. And then we'll have time for hand raising and voice questions during the Q&A segment at the end. I do want to say up front, and I apologize, Candace Dickerson could not join us today. She's the state navigator with NIU and Apprenticeship Illinois, meaning that she handles inquiries for regions that currently aren't recipients of the Navigator grant, and as well as being a resource to you as well for working with employers who may be larger employers or working across multiple LOEs. So Candace and I are kind of a duo as a resource for you on the programmatic side of things for Apprenticeship Illinois. And she is fallen ill and could not be with us today. But we wishing her get well soon hopes. And if maybe you can hear, I'm also getting over a bit of a cough cold. So 'tis the season, but we're all chugging along through it. So section 1 is going to be what is registered apprenticeship. And again, it's really about making sure that all of us are on the same page internally and what we're communicating to employers. And so these components, before we talk about what apprenticeship is, it's important to clarify what apprenticeship is not. Apprenticeship is not an unpaid internship. Oftentimes, the words internship and apprenticeship are used interchangeably, sometimes with the best of intentions, but they could not be more different. Apprenticeships, as we'll see, are a much better investment and a much better worthwhile opportunity for those involved on both ends. Not to say there's anything wrong with internships, but as far as work-based learning opportunities go, they are pretty much on opposite ends of the spectrum. Apprenticeships are not limited to the trades or construction. Oftentimes, we may have preconceived notions of the kind of occupations that can be available for apprenticeship, but the fact of the matter is that they're not limited in that way. Apprentices are not limited to young people or, in fact, to new hires to an organization. Uh, Apprenticeship is not a means of corporate welfare, meaning it's not just a mechanism for funneling tax credits or other incentives to employers. It is fundamentally about providing workforce development to entire communities and to people who may have otherwise been left out of career ladders. But it's also not a magic wand that fixes all an organization's issues. And certainly in the navigator function, we may feel compelled to present it as such in terms of, quote, making the sale. But it's important that we never characterize apprenticeship as a be-all, end-all. There are tons of work-based learning opportunities or functions within workforce development that can help organizations. And certainly all of the partners we hear today have their own specific functions that help things. And apprenticeship is just another tool to add to the toolkit. So if that's what apprenticeship is not, apprenticeships are paid jobs, usually full-time with benefits. They are found in every sector and industry across the country. Over 1,300 occupations already registered with the Department of Labor as being apprenticeable. I always say everything from aviator to zoologist. And they're open to new and current workers from any age and background. And when developed correctly, as I hope we'll see over the course of today's webinar, they are a life-changing career-building opportunity for participants. But most of all, apprenticeship is an investment. It's an investment of time and money on the part of the employer, on the part of the apprentices themselves who are committed to growing and training in their chosen career field, on the part of our communities, our local community colleges, our workforce boards. They're an investment for everyone, but they are a worthwhile investment, as hopefully you'll see as we move through the webinar today. So now we're going to move through 7 components of registered apprenticeship. These are the official 7 DOL components. There used to be 5. If you saw my presentation back in August, there was 5 then. There's 7 now. It's very exciting. New components dropping every day. But we want to review these just because they help us get a really clear-cut understanding of what apprenticeship is and helps clearly define what our role is as navigators. Apprenticeships, first and foremost, are business-led, which means that employers have the final say on program design. What I tell employers is that neither myself, nor the DOL, nor anyone at the colleges I'm working with are going to tell them what their program has to look like. It's important that employers feel like they are in the driver's seat when it comes to these programs. They're very easily alienated sometimes by the idea of working with DOL or the idea of a registered program. And so it's important that we act as advisors. That does not mean that we should not always be honest and open when a program is falling short. We should always be advising on best practices. But we're really looking for opportunities where we can incorporate employer input. And we'll go through those today as we go along. I'm very invested in the idea that it's important to, quote, make the sale in terms of developing these programs, not only to create opportunities, but to meet deliverables for the grant, but not at any cost, which means not developing programs at the cost of the apprentices who will go through them. Our goal is quality in registered apprenticeship. And what does quality mean? Well, it means positive outcomes, not just for employers and apprentices, but for the communities in which those employers and apprentices reside. Because when we see individuals going through these programs, being successful, seeing these career opportunities that didn't exist before being developed, that's inspiring for everybody. And a worthwhile program can only bring benefits and further programs in that area. So first and foremost, apprenticeships are business-led. Second, they are a paid job. What does that mean? Apprentices earn a progressive wage schedule as they move through their program. What that means is they at a percentage, not always a defined percentage, but just some percentage of what the journey worker or veteran or mentor wage for that role would be. So if you have somebody who's been in a role, a skilled role for 3 or 4 years, and they're making $27, $28 an hour, the apprentice isn't going to start at $28 an hour. They're building their way up to that throughout the program. They might start at $15 an hour for the first year. They might get a bump up to $17.50 after the first 6 months, and they might continue earning raises, so on and so forth, until they get to that journey worker or mentor wage. Now, how they work their way up to that wage is one of a few combinations. Some programs are time-based, meaning the ways in which apprentices earn their raises are strictly based on the amount of time they've been in the program. So, first 6 months they make this. Once they've been there for a year, they make this, so on and so forth. There's also competency-based programs. Every apprenticeship program is registered with a set of skills that the apprentices are expected to have gained by the time they have completed, which means apprentices can also earn their raises as a direct reward for their skill gains in that way. So they may have a set of 30 competencies for their apprenticeship program, and every 5 that they get signed off on, they get a $2 an hour raise. And that's how they work their way up. We can also hybridize that wage schedule to reward apprentices for both their time commitments with their employers and also the skill gains they've made. And those direct rewards for skill gains are a huge part of why apprenticeship has such a high retention rate. Because unlike in most occupations and situations where individuals don't know how they're going to earn that next wage increase, apprentices know that by committing to excellence and by working towards these competencies or their time commitment, they can see a direct reward in their wage increases. The wage schedule is completely customizable for employers, and it can be incredibly simple. A DOL will accept a wage schedule that says starting wage $15 an hour, ending wage $17 an hour. However, one of the things I will encourage you to do throughout today's webinar is not just to consider what's the easiest or bare minimum that can get by when registering a program for an employer, but what are the best practices that will actually incentivize retention among the apprentices that the employer hopes to recruit. And so a longer or more complex wage schedule, which is providing more steady increments of wage increases throughout the program, rather than just one starting wage and one ending wage, is going to see a better retention because it's giving those more direct rewards for skill gains. Now, I'll be honest with you, the payroll department at every apprenticeship employer hates these things because it's different from what they normally have to do, and that can be an obstacle. But if you can make the pitch that these wage schedules are part of why these programs have such strong retention, it's the hope that the employer will also buy into that idea, and they'll say, too bad, so sad, we're going to make this happen. We want to use available data. We talked about advising employers and helping them stay competitive and helping them determine that their program is high quality. And one of the ways we can do that is by looking at ONET's online wage average system. And I'll move to the next slide for this here. This is available on onetonline.org. Many of you are probably familiar with the ONET occupation codes that exist for just about every job occupation under the sun. And so for each of those codes, we can actually look up the specific wages for a part of the state. And so you can see here that I've pulled up the local wages for registered nurses in East Central Illinois, where LWIA 23 is located. And so we can see how the wages there compare more broadly to the state of Illinois and to the United States. Now, what this is useful in is if I was developing a registered nursing apprenticeship with an employer, and they were proposing that their finishing wage at the end of the program would be $25 an hour, I could show them with data that that would be fairly non-competitive. And if they show, now again, it's the employer's final decision as to where they set their wages. You're not telling them to do anything. But if you can show them this data and say empirically, hey, you're setting this incredibly low, not just for the state, but even for our area, and you're going to have a real hard time actually maintaining and keeping and retaining those apprentices that you spent all this time investing in. The hope is that they'll be advised to stay more competitive, which ultimately leads to a better outcome for the employer because they're more likely to retain that apprentice, and better outcomes for the apprentice because they're going to be making better wages. So component number 2 is that apprenticeships are a paid job. They're usually a paid full-time job. And when I say usually, what I mean is that in 99.9% of cases, that's what they should be. That does not mean that there are no DOL approved programs in which apprentices work part-time hours, but by and large, you're going to see full-time jobs, benefits, the whole shebang as a part of it. The third DOL component of apprenticeship is on-the-job mentorship. Mentorship is at the very heart of apprenticeship. When we think of apprenticeship, before corporations existed, you would be apprenticed to someone. You would be the blacksmith's apprentice, And so that kind of model still exists within our registered apprenticeship model because the employers assign each apprentice an on-the-job mentor. And that mentor-apprentice relationship is really huge and really crucial to the success of these programs because giving somebody an on-the-job contact who they're going to be shadowing, working alongside, having regular check-ins with, that mentorship is so huge. Anybody who's had a mentor in the course of their career or education can speak to the value of that. And having that as a formalized part of these programs is incredibly crucial. And so it's important that we don't think of the mentor as an afterthought or just as somebody who's going to be signing off on your wage increases for the program, but that employers take time in making the determinations of who's going to fulfill these roles. In hybrid and competency-based programs, mentors are responsible for the marking up apprentices' progress. They're the ones who make the decision as to when the apprentices have actually completed their competencies and therefore their program. I'll say this, a real best practice that one at least community college that I know of, Lakeland College, is investing in is the idea of offering train-the-trainer curriculums to employers involved in apprenticeship free of charge to make sure that the quality of that mentorship is there. And certainly I would recommend that as a best practice where possible, just because, again, we really want to hit home the idea that this mentorship is important. An additional component of this is that every program establishes a ratio of journey workers / mentors to apprentices. And for safety purposes, that ratio has to be upheld at all times. It's especially important with something like linemen, where you never want like 4 people who have never had experience on that kind of job site with one mentor. You don't want people put in a situation where somebody can make a potentially fatal mistake. The stakes aren't always that high, but it's worth noting that the ratio has specific functions on CJA or prevailing wage job sites where it may be tied to hourly compensation or to incentives that are being received on those work sites by the employer or subcontractors. Component 4 is supplemental education. Apprentices must receive a minimum 144 hours of classroom education per calendar year of their program, and this education is funded by the employer. Most often upfront. Upfront is the best practices. Employers don't like that. Employers like a reimbursement model. But again, you're creating more barriers for apprentices to actually participate if they're expected to be the ones funding the education upfront. And so again, 99.9% of the time, employers are going to be paying for this education upfront. And this education is a crucial component of registered apprenticeship, just as important as the on-the-job mentorship, and just as important as the on-the-job training is the classroom learning that supplements that education. The idea that we're combining the best of theory and practice for apprentices cannot go understated. And so it's very important for, again, maintaining the quality of these programs that instruction comes from an accredited training provider or broadly well-regarded industry provider. So that's going to mean your local community college or a well-regarded industry provider. And when I say well-regarded industry provider, I don't mean Joe Schmo's industrycertificates.com. I mean, if you ask 5 employers about that specific training provider, if 3 out of 5 of them would not recognize the quality of that provider and make a hiring decision based on it, it should not be the training for a registered apprenticeship program. Very important that the education component of these programs has value. Employers are going to sometimes look for the programs that are most cheap or convenient since they're footing the bill. But again, that's where we can use incentives, WIOA funds, just the idea that somebody is going to be more likely to sign on to a program if it seems like the value add for them is greater to help nudge them in the right direction. I want to be clear, this does not mean that I'm saying that every apprenticeship needs an associate's degree or higher. Not at all. However, the vast majority of community colleges are often going to be providing some sort of 1 year, 1.5 year certificate below an associate's degree. that's going to be accredited and it's going to carry more weight than a program where somebody watched 7 hours of YouTube videos and they got a cheap PDF certificate to hang on the fridge. So again, making sure that we're maintaining quality. As it relates to supplemental education, there are instances where certification or licensing are required to fill their job duties. So something like CDL drivers or certified nursing assistants, obviously they can't complete their on-the-job training until they have that certification. And so you would front load that education before they start any of their on-the-job training. They would complete all of their classroom education for that program. Now, there are instances where we have to think creatively because of this. So, for instance, we developed a registered nurse program, and I was discussing earlier that program. So, obviously, somebody can't be a registered nurse right off the bat. They have to have their RN credential to do that work. However, you could have a registered nurse apprentice working as a CNA while they work to that RN. You could even have them receive their LPN on their way to their RN, and then they're working as an LPN. So there are creative ways to think about using supplemental education to build in stepping stone credentials or micro credentials to, again, build the value and quality of that program. And ultimately, at the end of the day, for the employer, they're getting more skilled labor out of that apprentice that way. And I mean, in the case of a registered nurse, I think we could all agree that a registered nurse who's been a CNA and an LPN is going to be a greater value add than somebody who hasn't been those things. So supplemental education, a hugely important component of registered apprenticeship, not something to be sidestepped or undermined or for the employer's convenience, but something to be championed for its immense value as part of this investment. Apprenticeships are diversity. Programs are designed to reflect the communities in which they're based through strong non-discrimination, anti-harassment, and recruitment practices that ensure access, equity, and inclusion. We want to make sure that these programs are open and accessible for everyone. And as part of that, DOL asks for standardized hiring requirements and interview processes for all apprentices, for all would-be apprentices who apply for these programs, just to ensure that there's no room for any kind of discrimination in those practices. Not that we assume employers would, but it's just to safeguard that. Additionally, employers work with their ATR to complete an affirmative action plan within 2 years of program registration, so long as they have 5 or more apprentices in that time. Employers sometimes freak out about this, the idea that it's a lot of paperwork, and I'll tell you right off the bat that it can seem that way, but DOL has ample resources available to assist with these processes, and ATRs are also on hand. And so one of the things I would do is if you're a navigator and you've developed a program at some point in time and it's coming up on that 2-year mark, I would meet with your ATR to talk through the process with them. So then you can, much in the same way as you'll guide employers through the process of registration, work with them on that as well. And so obviously that goes a little outside of the standard navigator functions, but being able to talk to the employer about this in a reassuring way so they're not freaking out, I think is a big value add. But there is a lot of resources available for this, and it's really not that much. It's just, I think one of the things you'll hopefully see is that most of the process of registration is entirely effortless on the part of the employer. And so the idea that they'd have to lift a finger at any point, therefore, might be jarring for them, but we can hopefully make it painless for them. Apprenticeships are about quality and safety. I mentioned before, there's a lot that's standardized with these programs when they're registered. One of those things is lists of competencies. I mentioned the competencies previously in the context of apprentices working through their wage schedule. But those competencies are standardized and approved by DOL to make sure that if somebody says they've completed an apprenticeship in carpentry, we can expect that their skills will be across the board no matter what organization they apprentice to. We don't want somebody saying it's a carpentry apprenticeship and then, taking out half the competencies to make it a shorter program, and then that person has all sorts of skill sets that they don't actually have the ability to do. So competencies are standardized across the board, and that's part of the registration process. The mentor-apprentice ratio encourages worksite safety, especially in the construction and trades programs where worksites can be a little more dangerous potentially. In fulfilling the navigator role, it's your responsibility to ensure the quality of the programs you help develop. And I hope I've touched on that as we've gone along so far. but really in our role as advisors, in our role as business service representatives, any function where we're working with employers, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing not only the outcomes for them, but the apprentice outcomes, so we can safeguard the value of registered apprenticeship, because there's nothing worse than a program that gets registered and it wasn't developed with apprentice outcomes in mind, and so it has a horrible retention rate, and the people that finish it are making low wages, and it leaves a bad taste in everybody's mouth. So to help keep the good name of apprenticeship going, it's important that we provide that quality control function and ensure a positive investment for all stakeholders. Lastly, apprenticeships are about credentials. Now, first and foremost, all apprentices who complete their programs receive a nationally recognized Journey Worker Certificate from the DOL. Now, there is an inherent value to that certificate in and of itself, particularly in some of the more traditional apprentice occupations. However, one of the nice things about partnering closely with our local community colleges as the providers for the majority of registered apprenticeship programs for classroom education is that there's an ample opportunity to include additional credentialing through certificate or degree programs. And we should develop those opportunities whenever possible. For instance, if you've got a 2-year program where somebody is completing 7 out of the 8 courses it would require to earn a certificate or a degree or anything like that, it's good to be an advocate for, well, if we add one more course, then when you're advertising this program to applicants, you can say you're going to get a funded college certificate in XYZ as part of that. Because better credentials are a better value add for apprentices. Not only that, the more coursework that an apprentice completes, the more knowledge they're going to have in their toolkit, the better value they're going to add to their work site. So having discussed the 7 DOL components, we'll now move on to outreach and working with employers. So why apprenticeship? We've all heard, anybody who's talked with an employer anytime in the last 3-4 years has heard probably similar problems. An increasingly high turnover and increasingly costly recruitment, particularly in manufacturing. If there's a machine that's not being operated, there's potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars being lost for every hour, day, however long that machine is not being operated. And obviously, it's not going to be as, intense of a loss across all sectors, but generally speaking, the money that employers are spending to recruit and replace the employers that they're turning over is not tenable. Additionally, employers complain about a lack of soft skills or increasing generational conflicts amongst their employees. There's a need to upskill the current workforce because the employees who have stuck on may not have the training or credentialing required. So an incumbent worker training of some kind involved in apprenticeship would be worthwhile there. Additionally, there's untapped talent pools. And so not just as a component of achieving DEIA goals, but also just in terms of making sure employers are accessing all of the talent pipeline they can. Apprenticeship is a part of that. There's a need for succession planning. Generationally, we're seeing a larger exit of baby boomers from the workforce. And so much knowledge and skill is just being lost. And so finding a way to create a mentorship opportunity where that knowledge can be passed down is hugely crucial. And then, of course, many rural areas suffer from the idea of brain drain, the idea that there's a pernicious lie in so many of our rural communities that success means going somewhere else. And so the talent that could have been cultivated and stayed in the area goes somewhere else. And so apprenticeship can help create opportunities that keep that talent in the area and keep those communities strong. Apprenticeship is, of course, a solution to many of these problems. I mentioned earlier it's not a magic wand, but it's no secret that it does address many of these concerns. Apprenticeships have a 92 to 94% retention rate that kind of fluctuates from year to year. We get these numbers from DOL. It's an investment, but it's a $1.50 on the dollar ROI. Again, that comes from DOL. You have the ability to upskill incumbent workers through apprenticeship, and the personal mentorship provided in the apprenticeship facilitates both better work habits and the ability to pass down expertise generationally. Youth apprenticeship in particular presents the ability to cultivate younger talent, especially in rural areas before people leave. You can help them see that there's an exciting opportunity to do the thing they want to do while they're still in high school. And additional incentives exist, including the 3,500 DCO tax credit per apprentice per year. Now, I will note, as I always note for employers, that that is a reimbursement for education tax credit. What that means is if employers aren't paying up to $3,500 that year for education expenses for that apprentice, they're not receiving that tax credit, which means if their WIOA or intermediary is footing the entire bill, they don't get it. But if they have some buy-in, if they have some, if they're in the game, then they're going to receive that tax credit. Now, I'll tell you that that $3,500 goes up an additional $1,500 to $5,000 if the individual apprentices live in a DCEO opportunity zone. That map I did not link here, but it's available online. And so I tell employers that. And additionally, the veteran tax credit that exists can stack with that. So, and that's just an addition. And so obviously what I don't mention here is, WIOA funds that can be braided into these programs, such as incumbent worker or ITA on the job training funds. Those obviously are an additional incentive that we would share with employers, but recognizing that not everybody here is from Title I, I did not put those specifically on these slides, but just know that as part of the total package of incentives that we present to employers, that would definitely be a component. So that's the employer case for apprenticeship. And why not apprenticeship is a question that we can consider addressing as well. Here are some of the common employer concerns that we see and some means of addressing them. Employers don't like the idea of working with the federal government a whole lot. And certainly I imagine any of our being largely public workforce partners, everybody has experienced some form of hesitancy in that regard. There's a fear of overwhelming paperwork, of oversight, and bureaucracy. And the simple fact of registered apprenticeship is that it's incredibly simple. And with proper navigation, it can be accomplished in 2 meetings or less. And I'll show you today how we can do it in 2 meetings or less. But a lot of the fears that employers have about the red tape they're going to have to go through really can be mitigated on our end simply by engaging in some best practices. We can actually come to the table the first time, the first meeting, with about 75% of the paperwork already done for them. And that's such a relief because the last thing they want to do is more paperwork. They have a fear of changing current recruitment or onboarding practices. HR departments in particular are oftentimes very set in their ways. But the good news is that apprenticeship oftentimes reflects the best practices their businesses are already engaged in. So they may already be pairing new hires up with older workers or more experienced workers as part of their onboarding process. They may already be paying for upskilling and education through a reimbursement mechanism. This is just a little change to that. But by and large, employers who are already doing the right things are already doing a lot of registered apprenticeship. There's a fear of bad investment. The idea, okay, you're going to have to be paying for school for this person for 2 years. How do I know they're not going to leave immediately because they want to get $2 more down the street? Now, what I'll say is this: a program that is developed well, that is incentivizing through competitive wages, a competitive wage schedule, a quality provided education, it's going to be a good investment and you're going to see some natural retention there. But employers who still have concerns oftentimes will develop contracts or agreements with apprentices that safeguard their investment, that say, okay, we're going to pay for the associate's degree in industrial maintenance tech for you, and you're going to stay on with us for at least 3 or 4 years. And if you leave before that, we'll be sending you an invoice for a prorated amount of the tuition that we covered. Now, DOL is not involved in that kind of contracting or agreements, but it's well within the rights of the employers, and many of them do. However, those are oftentimes unnecessary if a program is developed correctly to begin with. And of course, employers, like many of us, simply fear having more stuff in their pile, more work on their desk. But by collaborating with IBS team members acting as navigators and intermediaries, there's minimum work to be done on the part of the employer. Now, many of you are thinking, oh, great. All you're saying is that there's going to be more work for me. And there will be a little bit on your part, but hopefully today we can show you how painless and streamlined the process it can actually be incorporating apprenticeship into your existing outreach processes to the benefit of all. So partnering on apprenticeships and working with your integrated business service teams. The IBST approach is new to this grant cycle, but the idea that collaborating all the title partners, all of our local economic development, community college, workforce board partners together developing apprenticeships, I think not only is incredibly logical, but it just makes sense given the strengths that we all have and the work that we're all already doing. The primary team members are going to be business service representatives, regardless of the title they're representing, as well as community college representatives. Those may be business-facing representatives from community colleges or adult ed. It's kind of going to depend on the way responsibilities are divided at each individual community college and local economic development representatives. If you are a Title I partner or IDES partner on this call, community colleges are the single most important collaborators you're going to have in developing registered apprenticeship programs. And your local economic development partners are going to be your greatest partners in business outreach. Those are crucial collaborations. Don't try to do this stuff alone, not only because it's harder, but because it's going to be less effective. I recognize that organizational commitments and personalities differ from LWIA to LWIA, from community college to community college, but the partnerships between LWIAs and community colleges and local economic development are so important. And so maintaining and strengthening those partnerships is the path forward for developing apprenticeships. And so the goal is for us to all to collaborate with the common is helping apprentices, employers, and the community at large, because apprenticeships really are a win-win. They're a win for employers, they're apprentices, they're a win for our educational providers. And so there's no reason not to act like. Employer outreach tips in general. We want to work on maximizing our reach. And so that looks like combining resources and not feeling like we have to reinvent the wheel. And don't cold call, I think, for the most part, is a tip that I would say. Now, why would I say don't cold call? Because many of you say, Nate, the navigator function is primarily a sales role. And I disagree with that. I think it's a combination of sales and advisory. But one of the things I would say is if we remember that apprenticeship is a major 2 to 3 to 4 year investment that employers are making, why would an employer be willing to make the investment of an organization they've never heard of? No offense to our LWIA partners, but oftentimes it's the best kept secret. Tons of acronyms they're unfamiliar with, and the prospect of working with the Department of Labor. That's not particularly appetizing for most employers. But your local chambers and economic development organizations have years, if not decades, of pre-existing relationships with those employers. And so they can make referrals on your behalf. And so not only does that eliminate the need for cold calls, but it's going to provide you with an ethos, a reputation, a vibe otherwise unavailable to you. That's going to make all of the acronyms you have to spew with them a little less alienating. And so lunch and learns, after hours events, if they got a golf scramble, go talk at the lunch. That's going to be your friend. You want to get in front of the most employers possible and do so smiling and shaking hands with somebody who they trust. And what that's going to do is create a whole lot of connections for you. And if you can get significant buy-in from your chamber partners, they will do the outreach for you. They will refer people to you. They will help make meetings for you. They really can be your champions out in the community. Because fact of the matter is, many of our LWIAs cover multiple counties or broad geographic regions or just huge amounts of businesses that it's very difficult to cover meaningfully on our own. But by working through our economic development partners, we can make those connections that we wouldn't otherwise be able to do so on our own. And then, of course, leveraging existing educational partnerships. Talk to your local K-12 district, not only because youth apprenticeships are an option, but because they're where buy-in starts for so much of this stuff. And your local K-12 district probably has employers providing cooperative education, especially at the high school level. They may have local businesses where they're sending the third graders to tour the local factory. Those are all existing connections that can also be leveraged towards apprenticeship. And of course, community colleges are going to have relationships with employers, whether they're recruiting students for internships out of specific programs, or they have employers who are upskilling their employees currently as incumbent workers through the community colleges. There's going to be a lot of pre-existing relationships just between your chamber partners, your community colleges, your K-12 districts. And from there, if you make all of those connections, word of mouth is earnestly going to do a lot of the rest for you. So in terms of maximizing your reach, don't overextend yourself. Strategically use the partnerships you already have. Chambers want what's best for their members, and their members want meaningful information, or they're going to stop paying for their membership. And so get in front of those audiences is a huge boon to you in your apprenticeship expansion efforts. So now, if you didn't know them before, you will know them now. It's the 3 C's of registering an apprenticeship: competencies, coursework, compensation. And we're going to talk about is how we can get to these 3 C's. Because if we get these 3 C's, we have everything we need to register a program with the Department of Labor. We can do so fairly simply. To break this down here, we can actually brainstorm and prepare options for competencies and coursework prior to even meeting with the employer. You can have one email exchange with the employer and have about 80% of the paperwork ready to register an apprenticeship on their behalf already completed and ready to go. Now, the compensation factor, the progressive wage schedule, there's not as much you can do on the front end, and I'll be honest with you, it's the sticking point with a lot of programs in development. Is the competencies get signed off on, the coursework gets signed off on, and you'll wait months and months and months for them to tell you how much they're going to pay people. But these, by and large, are the 3 pieces of information needed to register a program with DOL. Competencies. What are the apprentices going to need to know what to do on the job? Coursework. What are they going to learn that supplements their on-the-job training and helps them build those skills? The compensation. What are they going to get paid, and when are they going to get paid? So with competencies, coursework, and compensation, we can register a program, and now we'll see how we work towards those 3 C's. So first, we're starting preparation for employer outreach. We'll get ready to present apprenticeship as a solution. So once the employer has been referred to you or you've made a connection, you're going to want to do the following every time before that initial meeting. First, you're going to ask them via email or phone, where are they located and what positions are they looking to develop an apprenticeship for? If you do nothing else on this slide, please, please, please ask them where they're located and what positions they're looking to develop an apprenticeship for. Now, why are we asking the location? Well, first, you want to make sure that they're actually in your area, because believe it or not, more often than not, they're just emailing somebody. They don't really know if you're the right person to contact. And so you'll want to make sure that they're actually within the region you're covering. And this is where, if you're never ever unsure of whether or not they're in your area, feel free to refer them to Candace. Candace is the state navigator, handles the areas that don't currently have navigator functions being fulfilled. And she's also happy to take larger projects or instances where you have questions. What positions they're looking to develop, I'll let you know that sometimes they may say, I don't know, and that's okay. That's not a dead end. But if they do know, that's always easier. But please ask those 2 questions to make sure that you have vital pieces of information necessary to build on 3 C's. Second thing you're going to want to do is research the organization. You're going to want to do your homework, as Lee Reese would say. You're going to look at reviews on Glassdoor, LinkedIn, get a sense of what the company culture is like. If there are turnover issues, Glassdoor is where angry people are going to let you know about it. And so understanding that the angriest people leaving reviews about working for an employer is not always going to be indicative. It's just kind of good to know the situation that you're going to be walking into as you prepare to offer business solutions, one of which will be apprenticeship. You're going to look at what job postings they're currently offering online. In particular, if they tell you, I don't know, just double check if they have things posted, because most of the time they will in some capacity, either directly on their website or through job boards like Indeed, Snag a Job, etc. And you can also, if they've really been posting, then they'll be on your area's help wanted online report from IDES. And if you aren't currently looking at your monthly IDES help wanted online report, it's a really, well, I just think it's cool. Maybe I'm just a geek nerd, but I think it's cool. For each EDR and for the state for each month, it shows you the top employers, how many job postings they've made, as well as the occupations and the top occupations that were posted within your region. And so just looking at this one, and forgive me, this is almost half a year old now. It's old when I was preparing the August slides. We can see that registered nursing, to no surprise, as well as industrial engineers, industrial technologists, and CDL drivers are among the top occupations posted. And so if I'm meeting with an employer who I know is going to offer any of those, I can take that into account when preparing. And so again, first and foremost, we're going to ask those questions and do some background research. So now that they've provided us, or we have sought out occupations that we think will be a good fit for them, we can find our first C by pulling an existing apprenticeship template or work process schedule document from apprenticeship.gov. And I'm going to walk through this, so if you're freaking out, then I'm just going to leave it there. Don't worry. I mentioned earlier there's over 1,300 occupations already registered with DOL. What that means is for every one of those occupations, there is what we call a work process schedule or a template of the apprenticeship competencies available for your browsing pleasure at apprenticeship.com. And so I'll scroll to this one, but if we're on Apprenticeship USA, if you click on the employers or resources tabs up there at the top, one of the options will be Occupation Finder, and that will pull you to this screen right here. And so it gives us a lot of browsing options, including by ONET codes. And so a good practice to have is when an employer tells you what sort of position they're looking for. If it's something obvious, like the one we're doing here is automotive technician, you can just type in automotive technician in the search by occupation box, and you'll probably get the one that you're looking for. But if you get the sense that the employer's HR department has renamed a normally named position as something else to be different, that's where ONET can be useful in helping you determine exactly what position they're probably hiring for and connect you to the appropriate work process schedule. So here, let's say an employer told me that they were interested in an automotive technician apprenticeship. I would search that in the occupation box here on this slide, and I would pull up this list. And it'll give you, you'll see I have open a tab that says automotive mechanic. For these pages where it says automotive technician specialist are organized by ONET codes. And so what you'll see on this page then is every titled program that's been registered that use that ONET code. So you see below by the plus signs, auto radiator mechanic and spring repairer or hand spring repairer. Those are two different employers who use two different job titles for this role, probably with similar competencies. I'm going to select the competency-based work process schedule under automotive mechanic, which is the expanded occupation on the right-hand side there. And if I do, I had to make it into two columns. It's a document that looks like this. And you can see that it has a job description, it has an ONET code, it has an estimated program length, and an apprenticeship type box selected. If I wanted a time-based work process document, I could click on the download WPS under time-based. Most occupations will have all three automatically listed on apprenticeship.gov. Competency-based looks the cleanest, but it's going to come down to what the employer wants their program to look like at the end of the day. This is just what I'm showing for demonstration. So under that information, you'll see the competencies listed for this role. This is just some of them. There's about 5 pages front and back for automotive mechanic. As you can imagine, there's a lot of skills for being an automotive mechanic, but they vary in the amount of competencies listed from 1 page front and back, 2 pages. The most I've seen was, I think, 7 pages front and back, so 14 sides total of these competencies. And so we talked about our three three C's, and this is one of them, is the competencies for the program. Now, what you would do with an employer is go through these and determine if they accurately reflect the role as it exists at their organization. I'll tell you, one time I was working with an employer on an automotive mechanic program, and you'll see here on the right column under B, it says overhaul or replace carburetors. And the employer said, we're not working on carburetors anymore. That's outdated verbiage. We would just say fuel systems. So I said, okay. And I changed carburetors to fuel systems. And you can't see me, doing my that's all done hands. But that's the revisions. And so that's the kind of revisions we're looking for. So we're going to go line by line through these. And I know it sounds like it'd be incredibly tedious, but it usually takes less than 40 minutes. And we'll revise these competencies until they accurately reflect the role at the employer's organization. And this is an instance, again, where we want to make employers feel like they're customizing all of this. And this is an instance where you can really put them in the driver's seat, and they like that. They like to feel like the program is being customized to them, that they're not just being saddled with a one-size-fits-all program. And of course, they're not. But we just want to reinforce that feeling to increase their buy-in. So you can as I mentioned, there's going to be multiple matches for a lot of these. I would tend to download 2 or 3 myself and see if there's any major differences. Like, for instance, the spring repairer one might have wildly different competencies using the same ONET code. And so I might not present that one to them. But you, again, want to give them multiple options to look through. For the most part, you are never going to need to register a brand new occupation with DOL. In the time I've been working with employers, it hasn't happened. As I said, over 1,300 occupations are already there. There's usually an exact match or a very near match that we can kind of adjust the competencies to get it over the finish line. That's not to say it would be a horrendous bad thing if we had to register a new occupation with DOL. You would work with your ATR on that, but I'll say it's a much faster, more streamlined process when we're able to utilize an existing work process schedule, as we will the vast majority of the time. So that's our first C. We've got the competencies down, and before we've even met with the employer, we can show them that most of the work has already been done for them. The second C is going to be competencies, curriculum. We're going to find out what is the available training options for them. And so, again, we ask for the location of the employer, and we can use that to determine which Illinois Community College Board district the employer falls within, and then we'll want to partner with that community college. In the event that that community college is uninterested in actively partnering with you, as sometimes might be the case, then you're going to research and present their curricular offerings yourself. The hope is that all of our community colleges would like to be active partners and want to have someone come and speak about their own curriculum and customized training options and all of that. But in the event they don't, you're still going to want to, to the best of your abilities, represent the available curriculum that they have. So what you're going to do is look at the certificate and degree programs that are offered by the appropriate community college and determine if any of them match the occupation you're building a program for. Now, granted, again, customized training is absolutely a possibility in a lot of situations, and the community colleges can help build that. But again, this is an instance where the community college isn't partnering with us, and so we just want to see what they have available, sort of an out-of-the-box training option. And so what we're going to do is collect all the relevant information on those programs. So it could be course descriptions. Some community colleges very nicely have cost sheets for every single program available on their website. So you can print that out and actually tell the employer the estimated cost per apprentice that they'd be paying over the course of their apprenticeship. And any relevant scheduling options they might have, such as online coursework for the vast majority of the courses, maybe night classes, 2-day per week scheduling in the event of some technical programs, for instance. All of that sort of information you want to have on hand to present to the employer. Now, in the event there's not relevant curricular offerings available at your community college, then you would want to look at what industry online training providers and collecting the same kind of information on those programs as you would a college program. And essentially what we're doing here is we want to be able to present to the employer a full package. We want to tell them all about apprenticeship, all about the incentives that are available to them, and then tell them, hey, just so you know, if you're worried this is going to be a hassle, I've got 75% of the work already done for you. All you have to do is look at these curriculum options and just point to one and give me a thumbs up, and we're good to go. Granted, it's not always going to be that easy, but a lot of the times with a lot of occupations, it can be that easy to have an out-of-the-box work process schedule and a training curriculum available at your community college, where all they've got to do is say, all right, that looks good. And what that means is we've got 2 of our 3 C's available before we've even done stuff. And so again, when we present with an employer, that first meeting, we want to be able to talk to them about the 7 DOL components of apprenticeship, make sure that we're all on the same page. We want to talk about any applicable WIOA services, talk about the DCO tax credit, anything relevant to CEJA, anything like that, and then show them the work process schedules and curricular offerings. So that can sound like a lot, but we can really get through. I mean, we've been sitting here only about an hour, and you won't even have to say all the things I have to say. So if we're being efficient with this, what this means is we can get them to a place where if they bought in, if they like the idea, they may not necessarily have the latitude to fully approve everything that day. But if we can convince somebody at that organization, hopefully it's an HR director, hopefully it's a vice president, if it's the owner, operator, vice president, that's even better, because then you're really going to see movement and things getting done. But if we can convince them on that day that, hey, this is a painless process and most of it's already done for you, we can have this registered in just a couple of weeks if you work with it, then you're going to see results. And so one of the things I would encourage is anytime, no matter how positive they may seem in the moment, try to get that follow-up meeting scheduled while you're there. And really aim for any follow-up meeting to be the last meeting. That's not always going to be okay. There's going to be larger organizations where you may have to present the same information to 3 or 4 increasingly large groups to make sure that everybody gets it throughout the org chart. But we want to make sure that for the most part, our follow-up meetings are dedicated to 3 things. A, revising that list of competencies from that work process document. B, finalizing their coursework selections. And C, discussing and finalizing the progressive wage schedule, which gets us to that 3rd C of compensation. And so you can see how for the vast majority of the information we need to register one of these programs, we can really get through it very quickly by preparing for our initial employer meeting. And so here, in addition to the 3 C's, here's some miscellaneous pieces of information we'll need to register. We'll need to know the size of the company, roughly how many employees, the address of the employer, who's going to be their official complaint contact. Usually it's just going to be whoever you've been emailing. What their hiring procedure is going to be. I mentioned that as part of the components that's standardized. Similarly, their minimum hiring requirements, if they're requiring a driver's license, how much they have to be able to lift, etc. Are they interested in opening their program to other employers? Most of the time it's going to be no, unless it's actually a CBO or something that's registering as the sponsor. Are they going to pay for classroom time? I'll say this. Employers are not required to pay for the time that their apprentices spend in a classroom. However, if you think that somebody who's working 40 hours a week and taking 12 credits on top of that, unpaid, is not going to burn out, you are very optimistic, I would say. And so we would really encourage employers, and many of our intermediary partners actually require employers to pay for the time that apprentices spend in the classroom. It is a best practice, and it ensures their commitment to that coursework. That said, employers don't have to pay classroom time. They also don't necessarily have to pay their apprentice wage for the classroom time. Some employers will provide a daily stipend for the days that apprentices spend in the classroom. Some will provide a stipend of some kind for travel. There's lots of creative ways to make it happen. Again, it's all flexible as to how the employer wants to design it. But we would encourage some kind of compensation for the classroom time as a best practice to ensure retention. And I can tell you, and I'm sure many of the intermediary partners who are here and not here can tell you with the apprenticeships that they've sponsored or had sponsored at their sites, is that the employers who do not pay for classroom time have not as good retention as employers that. So again, not required, but a best practice as we're thinking about the quality, as we're thinking about outcomes for apprentices. Okay, so finally, we've got our 3Cs, we've got our miscellaneous information, we're going to register our program. So again, we've received the competencies in the coursework prior to the initial meeting and then kind of revised it as we've gone, and we've received our compensation in the form of the progressive wage schedule from the employer. Again, sometimes that can be as simple as 2 numbers. We really want it to reflect direct rewards for skill gains during the program. So we're on Standards Builder here. This is the homepage on Standards Builder, and I'm not going to fly through this too quickly, but I do want us to have a good amount of time left for Q&A, just because I know I've had to go through a lot of this stuff pretty quickly, and I want to make sure I will clarify anything that was maybe left vague. So this is what Standards Builder looks like. You will need a login.gov account to access Standards Builder. Now, recently I've become aware that you do need permission from your ATR to access Rapids, which is the system in which intermediaries and employers input apprentice information to the DOL. But you do not need ATR permission to access Standards Builder. So just by creating a login.gov account, you should be able to access Standards Builder. It's kind of hard to navigate to. I would just Google DOL Apprenticeship Standards Builder. And maybe we'll put out a one-pager about specifically navigating to that site. It's worth noting, what I'm going to do here today is show screenshots moving through a dummy program in Standards Builder. DOL also has ample resources and videos available explaining how to use this site. And I'll tell you that in the time I've been using Standards Builder, it's gotten significantly better in terms of being a little less buggy. It's not a perfect site, but it functions pretty well most of the time. So we'll work through this, and what we're going to do is click on Create New Standards there on that left-hand column. And so because you are, okay, and here's a piece of nomenclature that's oftentimes confusing for people. When we talk about the sponsor of a registered apprenticeship program, we are not talking about the person who's paying for it. We're talking about the person who is taking ownership of the paperwork. So oftentimes, community colleges have acted as sponsors for the employer, but the employer is still paying the apprentice and paying their tuition. The sponsor just means who's in charge of the paperwork with DOL. And so the programs that we develop towards the Navigator grants, the vast majority of the time, the employer is going to be the sponsor. And so we would click on the right-hand button here that we are acting on behalf of a sponsor as a third party. It's going to ask for your information. This is outdated information for me. It used to be if you emailed that email that Jamie Porter at Yahoo would get it. Now I think you just get it, bounces back. But my actual email will be later. This address for LB 23 is correct, though. Give them a visit. They've got some great practices going on. Shout out their email, Peter Devin from. Okay, so it's going to ask us some questions to get started here before we get into the 3Cs. It's going to ask us how many states the sponsor currently operates in. It's going to ask us, as I mentioned, how many people are employed at the sponsor's organization and how many apprentices they intend to employ. This is determining whether or not the employer is going to be registering the program as a local program or a national program. A program that's putting in an excessive amount, not excessive necessarily, but a larger amount of apprentices, or will be operating across multiple states, it will shift to being registered as a national program, whereas the vast majority of programs you'll be developing working with employers will be local programs. So that will be the instance in this example, this dummy program. And again, as I mentioned in that miscellaneous information, whether or not they're interested in administrating a program for employers external to their organization, like a CBO or nonprofit, sponsoring a program that then subcontracted employers would participate in. Okay, so after we answer those questions, it tells us whether it's going to be a local or national program. This one's local. And so you put in then the sponsor's information. You've already put in your own third-party information. Now you're going to put in the information for the sponsor that you've collected. So our guy is Demo Derrickson, Demo D at apprenticeshipsrock.com. We've got his information in there. He's from Derrickson Automotive. We've got his address there. It's located in Effingham. And so now it's going to tell us, okay, you're in Illinois. Your state director is definitely Rising. And by the way, is great. It is absolutely available to answer any questions that go above Candace or my heads. And so especially know that the ATRs and Deb are also always available to assist you. So now what's this? We're going to find the occupation, AKA the competencies, the first of our 3Cs. And so just like we did on the apprenticeship.gov, we can search by occupation title or by ONET code. And just like we did on apprenticeship.gov when we were finding that initial work process document, we can click on automotive technician, specialist, I should say. And it shows us all of the ones that we were looking at before, but now with the specific RAPIDS codes, which can differ from ONET codes for the programs that we identified. So we are adding the automotive technician specialist to the program. Now it's worth noting that when you register a program on an employer's behalf, you can register multiple occupations at the same time. So if a hospital wanted a CNA and a phlebotomist program, you would register both those occupations, input the competencies and the curriculum for them separately in the same go-around here on Standards Builder. You can also revise a program to add new occupations after it's registered. Either way is fine, but if they're looking to launch both occupations at the same time, you're going to want to add it at this stage rather than trying to go back and revise it, because of course there will be some time in between when you submit the program and when it gets approved by your ATR and Deb. Okay, so this is our selected occupation, and you can see here that we can rename the title. This is big for employers as well. Ask them what they actually want the title of their apprentice to be. If it differs from the one on the work process document, they have creative control over what their apprentice's title is. And so you can enter that customized occupation title here. You're going to select whether the program is time-based, competency-based, or hybrid. That's, of course, part of that progressive wage schedule, the compensation signals we talked about. And so you have a drop down there for the estimated program length. Now, here's the thing you should know. When an occupation is initially registered with DOL, it's assigned a time limit. And so those are flexible up to 25%. So if a program is 2 years, it can be 2.5 years, it can be a year and a half. We can't make it a year. Here's another thing to note about competency-based programs. A time-based program has a minimum of 2,000 on-the-job hours, or 1 year full-time labor hour for a time-based program. Competency-based programs still have to be at least 2,000 hours. The reason for that is that most competency-based programs are going to be something like automotive technician, where it's an increasingly wide skill set where it makes sense to reward based on competencies rather than by time. You're not going to learn how to be an automotive technician in under a year. So competency-based programs do not get like a get out of jail free. This can only be a year-long card. Even a competency-based program still has to be $2,000 on the job. The difference is primarily in how the wage increases get doled out in that instance. But even competency-based has to be at least 1 year. Most oftentimes it will be long. So this is then those competencies that we talked about. This is a 2-year program, so the estimated length is preloaded as 4,000 hours. And then here we see all of those competencies. And we can delete them by clicking the red X, but if we scroll all the way down, we'll click on the Edit Work Activities button. And then here we would go in and do all of the revisions that we did to the Word document or paper version that we had earlier. So we can change the heading, the tasks, we can add tasks under a heading, whatever changes we and the employer made, we would add there. So once we put in that, Standards Builder has our competencies. Now it moves on to the curriculum. So it's going to ask, okay, are you going to be the one providing the training? If you're the LWIA, then no is going to be your answer. If you're one of our community college partners, then the answer might be yes. You'll input the information for the training provider and who the contact is going to be. Once you put in the training provider's information, if there is another RTI provider, so There are some instances where, let's say, you had a community college providing some of the training, and then you had an industry group providing the other part of the training. That happens sometimes. Or, for instance, something like OSHA might be getting provided through another provider. You would list them as well. Okay, once we've put in the training provider information, it's going to ask us for the zip code that's going to best match the program, and then information about each course that the apprentice is going to be taking. So if it's an online program, they still have to have modules in that program. You still have to know the name of that module, the number of hours it's going to take them to complete it. If it has a course number, you'll note here that the only things really required on this page are the number of contact hours, but the more detail we add here, the better. So in this instance, this was for an automotive tech program at Lakeland College. So from the Lakeland catalog, we put in the learning objectives, the course number, the contact hours, and the subject and all of that. So, and you would do that for every single class that the apprentice is going to be taking. If they're a certificate, it probably wouldn't be that many. If it's an associate's degree, it can take a second. But good to have that information on hand. Another reason to work with your community college partner, because they're going to have this information on hand, and then you don't have to look it up. Probationary period. This is the period of time during which the apprentice and sponsor are both free to walk away with no consequences. This is generally speaking, unless the employer has super strong feelings about that, it defaults to 25% of the program length. And honestly, this isn't often a big issue, again, when programs are developed correctly. And so just know that oftentimes this just stays at 25% of the program. Here we're going to enter in the wage schedule. And so we can see here that this is what a very simple wage schedule would look like. It's just an entry wage and a completion wage, and that's the minimum requirement. So we talked earlier about how these can be simple. That's what a simple one would look like. A more complex one would look something like this, where it's based on the number of competencies, and so we can see how they would earn competencies throughout their program to move from $17 to $28. And so again, this allows for a greater degree of reward for skill gain as they're moving through the program. It's worth noting that for that description box, we've had employers who, for instance, will put, if let's say for the registered nursing program, they just set one wage for when they were a CNA, one for when they were an LPN, one for when they earned the RN, and one for when they finished an RN residency in those boxes, and they use those as the rungs on the ladder, if you will. So a lot of flexibility with these wage schedules. What it ultimately looks like is two columns. What are they making, and when or how are they going to make it? Here we would enter our selection procedures. As I mentioned, these are standardized. So, how many interviews are they going to have? How many applicants are going to be selected out of the initial pool? And again, that's standardized for just making sure that there's nothing discriminatory going on. And once we've done that, we have all of the information in, and we would add another occupation, or we would move on to finalizing. Again, if the sponsor contact is going to be the complaint contact, and that's just checked there. If there's somebody else within the organization, an HR, for example, who would act as a complaint contact in the event that one were received, you would add that there. I mentioned before in miscellaneous that we want to make sure that we have the minimum qualifications for the program listed. You check the box for driver's license and anything else. As you can see, they have categories for aptitude, other qualifications, physical requirements, educational requirements, and minimum age. And then again, you are asked whether or not apprentices will be paid for their training hours. This is important. So in the instance that an apprentice transferred from another apprenticeship program with another employer, would they be credited experience? Or if they had educational experience prior to joining an apprenticeship program, they had completed part of a degree but not finished, and now they're going back, would the experience be rewarded for that or not? The employer would select yes or no, or tell you yes or no. This is where they're committing to the Equal Opportunity Pledge. It asks if there's a union affiliation with the program. And then this last thing asks whether or not the employer is willing to share a copy of their work process document. No proprietary information is on it. It's just literally their list of competencies, like the ones that we pulled from It's just asking whether or not they're going to allow that to be publicly available for others to utilize as a template, or whether they're saying, no, this is ours, you can't have it. Most employers do not care about this at all, but in the event they really spend some time making a very specific list of competencies and wanted it to be proprietary, then they would say, I do not agree. It's then going to give us a summary of everything we've inputted. We're going to scroll all the way down. We're going to click OK. I'm ready to submit. And it's just that easy, folks. Okay. We've only got 13 minutes left, and I've talked a lot. So with the remaining time, I want to open up to any questions. Are there any questions about the navigator function process, either in the outreach stage or in the registration stage? If you've been massively confused about anything, please let me know. My goal is to simplify all of this. I'm going to actually stop screen sharing. Any questions at all?
Hey Nate, Griffin here, working at DuPage. Just wondering, how do you get to the standards builder? Maybe I missed that.
Yeah, so I mentioned that we're probably going to have to make a one-pager on this.
Okay.
I'll do this in real time just to see if it works. I'm just going to type into my Google bar, standards builder, DOL.
It's through DOL.
And, okay.
Hey, Nate, this is Bernice.
How's it going, Bernice?
Good. How are you?
Good.
So I did go through that standards builder, but I actually got access. So I made my login through that one link, and I can send the link because you can make a login. But when I made the login, I did not have access to actually build that standard. I reached out to Meredith from the Department of Labor, and she sent me an additional link that said I had access to do that.
Okay.
And once I got that link, then with my sign-on, I was able to access all of the information that you shared today with how to build a standard.
Okay, that's very good to know. So thank you for sharing that, because I heard conflicting reports. So yeah, so then what you'll need to do after you make a login.gov account, then you will need to email your ATR and ask for access before you can access Standards Builder. It doesn't take them very long to do. Just say, hey, I'm working on a navigator, hey, I'm an intermediary, I'm registering programs as a third party on behalf of sponsors, and they will provide you access to that.
Would that be Nakia that I'd reach out to?
I don't know who the
Okay.
ATR for your specific region would be, but if that's the name you know, shoot them an email. They'll probably help you.
Okay, cool. And then I also had a question about the sponsor themselves. So I work with College of DuPage quite a bit, and I know that they've got a lot of apprenticeships already to go. So I'm wondering, is it possible to look at basically once I've identified a business that's interested in an apprenticeship that maybe they have, we go on a joint call and they would COD would be the sponsor, or
yeah, so
okay.
Intermediaries who are acting as sponsors who have a Rapids account can actually add new occupations or add employers to occupations from within Rapids. And so they don't actually have to use Standards Builder. That said, when I know that when Lakeland did that in the past, it seemed really easy at the offset, and then we had to have a pretty significant back and forth emailing with our ATR. So, and here's the other thing I'll say is that if in terms of the quality of the apprenticeship program, it doesn't matter who the sponsor is. If the employer's not comfortable registering directly with DOL, I'm of course so grateful that our intermediary community college partners are willing to function as the sponsor on their behalf. One thing I'll tell you though is in terms of grant deliverables, a program that's registered through an intermediary that's already offering programs counts as a program expansion, not a new program registered. So in terms of grant deliverables, it would behoove you for the employer to register independently. They could still use the community college for an RTI provider. Whether or not community colleges have willingness to provide like case management or additional services for programs that they're not acting as a direct sponsor of is going to vary from college to college. I would hope yes, but that's going to be up to their discretion.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, do we have any other questions? I'm not seeing anybody in the chat asking any questions. Are there any last minute questions that we want to ask in the chat?
And I'm going to pull back up slides just for a second because I did have a contact info slide that I forgot. And so, again, just to reiterate, I know this has been a lot of information, a lot of me talking, and I want to thank you all for being here and for being active in apprenticeship expansion in Illinois. In the event you have any questions throughout any of these processes, again, I have weekly office hours available from 10 to 2. Happy to brainstorm and work through this process with you. If you're having a hard time finding a work process schedule, you're having a hard time determining curricular providers in your area, community college doesn't offer something, happy to just be troubleshooting on Standards Builder, anything you need, 10 to 2, Tuesday, Thursdays, and available for meetings and anything else by appointment other than that. Similarly, Candace and I are the dynamic duo, and so email both of us, and one of us will get back to you pretty quickly and help you figure stuff out. So if there are no other questions, I do want to thank you all for being here, for your work with Apprenticeship Illinois. And I can't wait to see the opportunities that we build out for apprentices across the state. It's really exciting stuff.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we can go ahead and end this session. I'm just going to make sure one last time. Do we have any last minute questions before we end the session? Okay.
One more. Sorry, this is Griffin.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. No worries.
When will we have access to this recording? Because there's a lot of good slides on here.
So the recording will be available on Illinois WorkNet, hopefully pretty soon. I'm going to upload it to YouTube and then send it over to our contacts at KEB. So it should go up on WorkNet pretty quickly, like within 24 hours-ish.
And we'll get the slides up on the partner resources page of apprenticeshipillinois.com as well.
Great. Thank you.
Excellent. Any other questions? All right. Thank you all for attending. We very much appreciate you being here, and we hope that you learned a lot of valuable information. I know that I did. All right. We are going to go ahead and end this session. The recording, again, will be available on Illinois WorkNet, and the slide deck will be available as well. We hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. Bye-bye.